Rainbow Six Siege sucks for new players. This is for a variety of reasons, but I think it can be easily broken down into three main talking points, those being the Newcomer playlist, situations, and the community of people who play Rainbow. But first, let's quickly touch on why it's important for new players to have a good experience in the game. In a game like Siege, maintaining a healthy player base is important so that queue times don't last too long, and the developers have a reason to keep supporting the game. If Siege were to attract no new players, eventually the people who are currently playing would stop, and with no new players to replace them, Siege would start to die. So for Siege to stay in a good state, there needs to be a steady flow of new players, and in an ideal world, the number of new players would surpass the number of old players who no longer play the game. So with that out of the way, let's talk about situations. Situations is the single player portion of Siege, and while the game would like you to think of it as a small campaign mode complete with a real actor and flashy cutscenes, it is basically just a tutorial. Unfortunately, it only teaches the very basics of the game and doesn't delve into anything too complicated. If you've never played a first-person shooter before, this will be helpful, but for someone already familiar with the genre, it does the bare minimum to introduce the players to Siege. The first situation is very simple, and it touches on very little. You play on Old Hereford base, which hasn't been in the game for years, and you use Recruit, so it doesn't teach you anything about map knowledge or how to use a unique operator gadget. However, this is a good mission for new players because it gives an idea of how the game feels. It also is a good opportunity to practice breaching charges and flashbangs since both are equipped. While flashbangs are in almost every FPS game, breach charges are pretty unique to Siege. The game has destructible environments and breaches are there to help you destroy it. By looking at the optional tasks, we can see the game is trying to teach players the importance of headshots as well as aiming down sights. Not all first-person shooters have a one-shot kill mechanic, and this is a good way of letting players experiment with that. In theory, after hitting 4 headshots, the player will realize that headshots are an instant kill. Same with aiming down sights. In Counter-Strike, hipfiring will probably be better at close range, and you'll only want to ADS at long range. In Siege, the hipfire spread is all over the place, but while aiming down sights, shots are precise and land exactly where you are aiming. So these two optional tasks are teaching players how Siege is different from other popular games on the market. This is a good example of teaching players a mechanic by letting them figure it out themselves instead of outright telling them. The game missed an opportunity to explain leaning and how it works though. We can see it is an optional task in Tubular Assault, but you'd think this would be the perfect time.
In close quarters combat, operators must rely on situational awareness to locate and identify threats and assets.
Why is this guy not leaning in the video? It's a mechanic that's somewhat unique, and it seems that newer players don't exactly understand how it works. Headshots and aiming down sights have been in first-person shooters for years, and while the results are different in different games, are headshots one-shot kill? Is it better or worse to aim down sights at close range? Leaning is not really something that is standard in the FPS genre. It has started to appear more often, but it is not something your average Joe will expect in an FPS. This is an example of something that should be explained in more depth. Just a simple line about how leaning can be used to your advantage as it will expose less of your body would have been sufficient enough. The problem with situations is apparent pretty early on, and that's that they are outdated. Just look at the E3 demo. Most of the features that were shown off have been removed or drastically changed because Siege has evolved over the course of the last 5 years. A big example of this is bandit tricking. According to the developers, it was not an intentional feature, but rather the timing of placing a thermite charge and the timing of placing a bandit battery just happened to counter each other perfectly. Today, whole team compositions revolve around bandit tricking, yet bandit tricking is not explained anywhere in the game. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it could help newer players if there was even just a short explanation of what it is and how to do it somewhere in the game. It doesn't even need a situation type tutorial. There could just be a short video explaining the basics. In fact, the game even includes video tutorials.
When defending, you can barricade door and window frames to slow down attackers and cut off the line of sight.
Each one is clear and concise and gives exact instructions on how things work. Unfortunately, there are only 3 of them, and they cover floors, walls, and barricades. And since they don't play right away when starting the game, by the time most players are able to navigate the menu to find these videos, they will already know most of the information that is inside. Why not also include some more complicated videos that explain topics like bandit tricking, echo juggling, or finka, and all the random interactions that her ability has? These are not absolutely necessary, however it could help flatten the learning curve since there is so much information for new players to absorb. If there were videos that range from very simple to advanced, newer players could have a much easier time. And while YouTube is always an option, Siege is always changing, so a YouTube video that was helpful a few years ago is now probably out of date because of the new operators or even just nerfs and buffs to old operators. For example, Echo used to counter Dokkaebi, but now he doesn't, so if I watch any YouTube video about Echo that came out before he was nerfed a few months ago, it will have the wrong information.
So when Dokkaebi kills him, there's nothing to pick up, there's nothing to hack into, there's no phone, there's no way for her to get into his system, so his drone camera, for instance, is always safe. So that is confirmed.
Small changes like this are happening all the time. Again, your average Joe just starting the game is not going to know that Echo drones stop you from planting. Let's say he decides to plant the bomb last second and gets kicked off the plant by an Echo drone. He doesn't know what stopped him from planting, just that he lost the game because of some operator. If his team isn't communicating, he won't be able to ask why that happened, and even if he wanted to look it up, he won't even know what to look up.
Hey, teammate, defend me, I'm planting the bomb!
Are you sure about that?
Oh my god, never mind! What? We just lost because of that.
Video tutorials could also clear up misconceptions about the game. For example, I had a friend tell me that when Jackel is wearing his visor, he is immune to Ying's candelas. This is not true, but it does make sense why he would think that since the visors have the same UI, so it's not a huge leap to assume that Jackel's visor is also immune to candelas. There are some other weird gadget interactions in the game, like Ella and Zofia having a tolerance to each other's abilities, or Zofia being able to heal herself from a down but not out state, that are in there for no real reason, so I wasn't actually sure if it was a mechanic until I tested it myself. As a brand new player, it is hard to keep track of all the operators, and if someone told you Jackel was immune to Ying, you would have no reason not to believe them, since you know nothing about the game. I think video tutorials could really be utilized as a way to help give new players accurate, useful, and in-date information. Let's move on to situation 2. Again, you play as Recruit, but this time you're playing on House, a map that's still in the game. It will be reworked soon, but based off of the later missions, I assume that when the rework comes out, the map will be replaced with the new version of House. Hereford Base is the only map that hasn't been changed to the rework in the situations, probably because it was the map that was changed the most in the rework. We are only on the second situation and things are already going horribly wrong. For some reason it has you play the hostage game mode, which wouldn't be that bad except that 6 of the 10 situations have you playing hostage. Let's take a quick detour and explain why hostage sucks and why we shouldn't be teaching it to new players. Rainbow Six Siege launched with 3 multiplayer game modes, those being Bomb, Secure Area, and Hostage. Bomb is similar to Search and Destroy in Call of Duty, or the Bomb Defuse playlist in Counter-Strike. Secure Area is a dumbed-down version of Bomb with only one objective that only requires players to stand in the room instead of planting to secure the objective. And Hostage is, well, Hostage. There's an NPC hostage who is being guarded by defenders while attackers need to go extract him. Hostage was shown off prominently before the game's launch in the famous E3 demo. However, after the game actually released, Bomb became the most popular game mode. This is because it is the most competitive and balanced of the 3. Both teams need to be coordinated and focused to do well. Unlike in Secure Area, defenders are not alerted when enemies enter sight and only know once the bomb has been planted. They also have 2 sites to defend instead of just 1. Similarly, for the attackers, instead of having to just get into sight to win, they are required to take the diffuser to sight and plant it. There's only 1 diffuser and it takes 7 seconds to plant. So even if you do get into sight, you need to make sure you have the diffuser, and then you need your team to cover your back while planting because of how vulnerable you are. There are more factors than that, but basically Bomb was deemed the best game mode and is currently the only game mode available in Ranked. Hostage is the exact opposite.
Check your fire. Hostage injured.
Easy, I've got you.
The hostage is very easy for attackers to pick up and only takes a few seconds, so attackers only need a window of about 10 seconds where no defender is paying attention to win the game. Because you can just grab the hostage and then run outside and win, this makes it very hard for defenders to roam and forces most of the team to anchor. This just leads to all the defenders being in one room and all the attackers going straight to that room. It becomes very claustrophobic. Add a bunch of trap ops as well as a Ying to flash out sight and it turns into a clusterfuck pretty fast. Since the game mode is not in Ranked, the meta is stale and never really changes. The only people who play this game mode are people who like to fuck around or people who haven't figured out that you can turn off hostage in the settings menu. Since the hostage can be killed very easily, it seems like the meta has become trying to trick the other team into killing the hostage. Another way to ruin the game is to just grab the hostage as soon as possible and then go hide on the roof for the rest of the round. If you take too long sitting on the roof, eventually the game will end, but the fact that you can spend 4 minutes just chilling on the roof should say enough about the game mode. Hostage is extremely imbalanced, but no one cares because no one plays it. On top of that, Situations teaches you how to play hostage in the wrong way. In the Situations, once you grab the hostage, you have to take them to a specific extraction point, and then once you get there, you need to wait a few seconds for the hostage to be extracted. This is not how it's played in multiplayer. In multiplayer, you simply need to grab the hostage, and then you can take it pretty much anywhere outside, and they will instantly be extracted. So even if a new player is planning on playing hostage, the game is teaching them how to play the wrong version of hostage. Same thing with the defending Situations. Instead of trying to capture the hostage, the enemies simply try to kill him. I assume this is because the developers didn't know how to properly program the NPC to grab and extract the hostage, but who knows?
In a hostage situation, you cannot be slow and methodical.
Wait, what? Wouldn't you want to be slow and methodical in a hostage situation so you don't shoot the hostage? Anyways, it's weird that the map has all the upstairs windows blocked off so that you have to extract the hostage through the front door. This is not a bad thing, and in fact, I think this is something that should have been implemented into other situations to force players to experience the whole map. But this is the most prominent example of it in Situations. They also blocked off construction for some reason, even though you can breach into it really easily. The mission gets point for teaching players the basics of a map, but I mean, why not just play T-Hunt on House? It's basically the same thing. In fact, most of these situations are just T-Hunt with less enemies. Why not just add a beginner difficulty to T-Hunt with less enemies, and then new players would be able to play them on any map they liked with any operator they liked. That way they could mess with attachments instead of being given a random assortment of them. Tubular Assault has you play as Ash on plane, as you're tasked with taking down 11 enemies. It is a good introduction to plane as it has you traverse most of the map. Ash is given a brief introduction as well, and you are encouraged to use her gadget, although it is not at all necessary to beat the situation. I guess this is perfect though, since real Ash mains don't use her gadget anyway. This is one of the better missions as it gives a good introduction to both a map and an operator. The next situation has you playing Smoke on Hereford base, protecting a hostage. It works as a good tutorial for Smoke, but again, the map is no longer in the game. Just a quick nitpick, in the intro it shows Smoke use a Nitro Cell, which he no longer has, and in the actual mission you are given a shield. Also, for some reason in the intro they're talking about smoke grenades, and it even says smoke grenade on the screen, but they're showing Smoke use a Nitro Cell. I think this could lead to some confusion, but it's not a huge deal. There are a lot of tiny details like this that could easily be fixed but are not a big priority for Ubisoft. This situation tries to get you to barricade as well, showing off its advantages in defending. Unfortunately, it doesn't show the disadvantages. Newer players have the tendency to barricade everything, and this can be detrimental to the roamers on your team. When you are placing a player alone in one room, and it's guaranteed that all the enemies will try to push through one of these two doors, then barricading them is a great idea. However, this does not translate into the real multiplayer experience. In multiplayer, you will have teammates constantly coming and going from site. If you die on site, you will need a roamer to come back and retake it, and if everything is barricaded, they might not be able to get back on time. You will also have enemies coming from above to shoot you through the floor, and if you are boxed into a small room, you will be an easier kill as you'll have to take the barricade down to escape. This is what I mean when I say the situations do a terrible job of teaching you how to actually play the game. It tells you to barricade and shows you positive feedback for barricading, making new players think that they should barricade, but in a real multiplayer game, it won't work out. However, new players probably won't make the connection that barricading everything is what lost them the game. Let's say I'm a new player, and I barricade myself in sight, and then the attackers push in and kill me. I then spectate a roamer who is off-site. At this point, I don't know what roaming is and just think that they are bad for not being on site. The roamer attempts to make their way back to site, but they are unable to because every door on the map is barricaded. In my mind, I am not thinking, next time, I shouldn't barricade everything so that the roamers can get back on site. What I am thinking is, next time, the roamer should play on site and not be so far away. This is a mindset that is common from what I have seen, and so while I think it's a good idea to teach new players the mechanics of how to barricade, why isn't there also a video explaining what a roamer is and some of the reasons why you shouldn't barricade? When making the game, Ubisoft probably did expect everyone to play on site, and from that standpoint, there would be no reason to discourage players from barricading. But now that the meta has evolved, so should the tutorials. The next situation is a Capcan tutorial, and it's pretty good. It's on a map that's in rotation, and it also introduces shield operators. It's pretty straightforward, and the only complaint I have is that in the video beforehand it shows Capcan using barbed wire, which he no longer has access to. In the actual mission, you are given impacts. Even though it is hostage, it still gives players a good idea of how to set up traps and how to anchor. Because the hostage is so vulnerable and dies easily, it forces players to play on site. This is the most basic level of defending and something that new players should be learning. There really isn't much of a difference between this tutorial and the last, besides the fact that you're playing Kapkan instead of Smoke. It seems weird to me that they found it necessary to give Kapkan a tutorial, as he is one of the easier operators to understand. I guess when the game came out, there were only 10 defenders though, but now the game has changed so much that there are much more complicated defenders who should have a tutorial, but don't because they weren't around when the game launched. Also, the tutorial doesn't go into any depth about how Kapkan traps work. It doesn't explain that they can be placed at different heights on the doors and the pros and cons that come with each placement level. In the next situation, you play as Thermite, as you once again try to capture a hostage. This one introduces droning, which is good, but there are several problems with the mission. First, it includes bombers. Bombers are an enemy type that used to be in T-Hunt, but they were so annoying that they were removed. So now the only place they exist is in situations. They take a lot of hits to kill, they're also the only enemy that takes more than one headshot, and they run at you really fast and explode if you do not kill them fast enough. These mechanics do not exist anywhere else in the game, so there's really no point practicing against an enemy that is very frustrating to play against, but that also doesn't have an analog in multiplayer. The second problem comes from map design. Since this is a multiplayer game that allows you to play sites on multiple spots in the building, the map has a lot of entrances and exits. Unlike in Counter-Strike or Call of Duty, where the objective remains in the same spot every time you play, in Siege each map has 4 sites to choose from. I would hope that these situations would help new players learn the maps, but they really don't do that because every time you play the situation, the hostage will be in the exact same spot. On this map in particular, the game really wants you to go from above and hard breach the hatch and then drop in and grab the hostage. In an older version of the situation, they had certain doors blocked off to try to funnel you to the hatch above. But when Cafe was reworked last year and they added it into the situations, they didn't remember this, and so now the fastest route is to just run in and skip the hatch without hard breaching anything. I also wish that the hostage was in a different place every time to give the mission some replay value. Every time replaying the level, you are forced to drone for a minute even if you know where the hostage is, and that's wasted time. It also means that instead of exploring the map fully, new players will only learn how to attack that one room. I guess they can approach it from a bunch of different ways, which is a good skill to learn, but I feel like a more complete understanding of a map's layout would be more helpful than only knowing how to attack one site, but I guess that's up for a debate. Another problem is that Thermite has grenades in this level. This is because that when the game launched he had them, but unlike the other levels where they replaced the old gadget for an updated one, here they keep it because you need to get 2 grenade kills for one of the stars. This could be changed easily to getting a claymore kill, but they either were too lazy to fix this or just wanted to teach players how grenades work in the situation and decided to keep it even though the loadout is outdated. Next, we play as Glaz on Canal. I think the original mission was supposed to teach you how to snipe, and Canal was perfect for it because of all the windows. But when they remade the map, they removed all the windows because they realized it wasn't fun for defenders to constantly be sniped. So this mission really doesn't play out as intended anymore. Glaz has been reworked so he can now see through smoke. This is the primary reason people bring him, but since that used to not be a thing, they don't explain it at all. It seems like it would be useful for new players, but I guess that Viola Davis is too expensive to hire for reshoots. Because the hostage is marked, it's super easy to just run in and grab him, so you aren't required to learn the map at all. Also, why are there enemies outside? This bugs me since this isn't a thing in multiplayer. In multiplayer, you never have to deal with defenders just standing around outside.
Well, go.
Spawn.
Over here. No, he's over here.
The next situation is the best, but it still has its problems. It's the only situation that is played on bomb, and that's great. It teaches players how to repel, and it's on a map that's still in rotation. Now on to the problems. First, the mission has you playing as Recruit, so you don't get any knowledge of how to use a unique operator gadget. You're also equipped with the F2. The F2 was one of the best guns when the game launched, but it has had significant nerfs and it now only has 26 bullets and high recoil compared to other assault rifles. This is not a big deal at all, but I can see brand new players struggling to use this gun, especially since every enemy on the map rushes you as soon as you plant. Given the high fire rate and low magazine size, I found myself switching to the pistol often. So this is either trying to teach players about ammo conservation and how to play a sidearm, or the devs didn't consider that maybe they should substitute the gun once they nerfed it a million times. Other problems include the fact that you're heavily encouraged to just rappel into the window on sight, and since the site is already marked on your screen, it is super easy. This gives the players very little map knowledge because most players will probably just run to the wall, rappel up and plant, so they will only be exposed to the one room of the map. This could have been fixed by making players drone to find the objective, or making it so that the bomb might spawn on a different room in the second floor, so that players would still be incentivized to rappel, but that on replay they could experience more of the maps besides just one room. Besides that though, the mission does a great job of teaching players how to attack on bomb. It shows how to plant, and that after you plant, you need to watch the diffuser from a safe spot and can't just leave it. However, you do have dumb things like the defending white mass being able to rappel into the window. This is something you won't have to worry about in multiplayer since defenders can't rappel. The next mission is the worst in the game. It has you play as IQ on Oregon as you try and eliminate all the enemies. It is terrible mostly because there are nitro cells everywhere that are constantly beeping and exploding if you get too close to them. This is to encourage you to use IQ's gadget, but it's just super tedious. There are also bombers and enemies outside to worry about. On top of the tedious, annoying mission, there is an objective that requires you to beat it in under 5 minutes. Trying to do this is very frustrating because you have to go slow to avoid being blown up every 2 seconds, but at the same time, you have to beat the timer. It does do a good job of teaching players Oregon though. Since this is an elimination round, players must traverse the map, although the basement is blocked off, so you can't learn that part of the map, I guess. This is another example of only teaching players the bare minimum of how a gadget works. IQ's gadget is not required to beat this level. When IQ came out, she was seen as useless because of the lack of defender gadgets.
They're going to send their IQ in there, and he's going to get his little gadget out, he's going to look through the wall, and he's going to be BAM! Down goes the C4. This is going to be the first and only use of IQ's gadget ever in pro play.
This tutorial should be updated where instead of nitro cells, you're shooting hidden echo and Valkyrie cams, since that is the primary function of her gadget in today's meta. The final mission sees you play as Thatcher. This has the same problem as a lot of other missions. It has bombers, clusters of nitro cells, and enemies outside. The hostage is already marked, and it makes it really easy to just grab him right away without experiencing much of the map. Overall, this gives players a good idea of how Thatcher works, and seems like it does want to force you to use his EMP to get rid of a cluster of nitro cells. After you play all 10 situations, you unlock Article 5, which is basically a slightly more cinematic T-hunt. This is cool I guess, but it requires you to use a matchmaking queue that is unique to this one mission to play, so most players will probably never play it because of the long queue times. Because of this, I won't talk about it, especially since it isn't really a tutorial mission and doesn't teach players anything new. If you beat every situation and complete all the optional objectives, you should have learned how headshots work, how to use breaching charges and flashbangs, what guns are like with iron sights, ACOG, and standard sights, how to lean, how to barricade, how to reinforce, how to anchor on defense, how grenades work, how to drone, how to plant and defend the diffuser. You also get a basic understanding of Ash, Thermite, Capcan, Glass, Smoke, IQ, and Thatcher, as well as a basic understanding of House, Plane, Orget, Consulate, Cafe, Canal, and Clubhouse. I think it's weird that the third objective on every situation is to finish with at least 50 health. More could have been taught to the players by introducing more subtle gameplay mechanics as a third objective, but it was probably just added to increase replay value, as most players will finish with less than 50 health on their first attempt. Basically, the situations need a full overhaul and to be completely redone. While a lot of this information is good, it barely scratches the surface of game knowledge required to do well in the game. And while a lot of stuff needs to just be learned through playing the game, it could be a much more pleasant experience for new players if there wasn't such a steep learning curve. Unfortunately, I don't think we will ever get a reworked tutorial game mode unless we get a sequel. But anyway, here would be my recommendations if they did rework situations. First, there should be a full tutorial for the bomb game mode. New players seem to struggle a lot with the complexity of the game. I played some of the Newcomer playlists, and it seems like there's a fundamental misunderstanding of the game mode. A lot of people try to plant directly on the bomb and don't realize that you can plant anywhere in the room. Defenders don't realize that you need to open up between sites and tend to reinforce and really anchor only one site. Roaming is another concept that is lost. Most players really want to turtle site and try to barricade everything. Unlike Hostage that requires pretty much everyone to play site, Bomb requires a coordinated team with half of the team on site and the other half holding important rooms throughout the map. Again, players will learn how to properly play the game after enough playtime, but why not flatten out the learning curve just a little bit and give players at least a small idea of how to play the most important game mode? This could be a video with some best practices or even a playable mission. Second, there should be more operator tutorials. There are so many operators in the game, and all of them interact in some way with many of the other operators. I think that the tutorials for operators we do have now aren't that great either. Thatcher's tutorial gives the most basic explanation of his gadget, but it fails to expand on it in any way. Most of the time, Thatcher will be used to counter Bandit for a hard breacher. In this instant, his EMP will destroy the Bandit battery. However, sometimes his EMP doesn't destroy certain gadgets. Mute jammers, electroclaws, and nitro cells will be destroyed, while Alibi's prisms, Wamai's magnets, and cameras will just be disabled, and depending on the camera, it will do different things. Black eyes will be temporarily disabled, evil eyes will open, exposing them to be shot, echo drones will fall from the ceiling. It's these kind of complicated interactions that could be explained a little bit better. At the end of the day, we just need a better tutorial system. There's been talk for a while about a better T-Hunt mode that maybe could let you switch weapons on the fly or change around weapon attachments to try out certain things, and something like that could be super helpful to new players. The community in this game is very bipolar. On one hand, I have met some of the nicest and most helpful people.
Did you miss the home G shot? You did.
But on the other, I have met some of the most toxic.
Fuck you! Fuck you in the ass! I hope your mom gets cancer and AIDS! Don't ever fucking play with me again!
A lot of this toxicity is targeted towards new players as well. Players who are bad at the game are more likely to be team killed or kicked than those who are better. And yes, I know sometimes you will be kicked for clutching even when the rest of your team is dead, so some people do just like to be toxic regardless of how good the player is. But bad players definitely are shit on a lot. Instead of having the attitude of kicking or team killing a new player, we as a community should instead try to help them improve at the game, because just kicking a bad player from the game is just going to keep them bad. Or if we were to give a few pointers, then they could start to improve and no longer be as bad. Some bad players stay bad because of the way they are treated. At the same time, new players need to be more open to suggestions. I cannot count the amount of times that a level 30 thinks they know exactly what they are doing and they are unable to take any feedback. So this is for you new players. If you have a teammate who is a much higher level than you, they probably have at least some idea of what they're talking about. If someone is telling you not to reinforce between sites or put up barricades everywhere, they know what they are talking about. So listen to your team. Not always, sometimes even experienced players have no idea what they are talking about, but as a new player, try to learn from what your team is doing and saying instead of just assuming you know everything about how the game works by level 30. Most of the time, toxicity comes from the experienced player trying to troll or shit on new players. So I'm not saying if you're new, it's all your fault, you're getting TK'd constantly. I think one of the best ways to fix this would be to remove the vote to kick functionality. We now have reverse friendly fire, so it's much harder to grief your team in the same way you used to be able to.
If you kill a teammate, unless your teammate forgives you, reverse friendly fire is activated.
Because of this, the vote to kick feature is now what is being used to grief the team. Fail to clutch? Kicked. You actually clutch? Kicked. You happen to get into a game with a 4-stack? Kicked. Kicking should only become an option when a player team kills, destroys a certain amount of team gadget, or seems to be negatively impacting the team. This would lead to a much better experience for most of the player base, but it would help new players the most. And I'm sure someone will find a way to abuse it, but the current system is already being abused plenty, so we should first fix the current issue and then figure out solutions for the new one when they arise. Smurfs are also a big problem, but since it ties directly into our next topic, I will talk about that there. The Newcomer playlist is terrible. I have no idea what Ubisoft was thinking with this one. I remember watching the stream when they first revealed it, and I knew immediately that it would just be crawling with Smurfs. First, you take a game that already has a huge Smurf population, and then you make a playlist that is only available for players under level 50, and expect that Smurfs won't be playing it constantly. To get this out of the way right now, I have played Newcomer playlist, and I played it as a Smurf. However, I went in there for the purpose of making this video and tried not to shit on new players. I played for a few hours, and this is what I found. The playlist is absolutely full of Smurfs, but so much so that it isn't even really a good experience for the Smurfs. Usually both teams have at least one player who is on a Smurf account, so it actually kind of balances itself out. But this still makes for a bad experience for new players because they are not the ones getting any kills. It just seems like a frustrating experience for everyone. There's one game that I got into where I went against a level 40 Plat player. It seems like there should be some system in place where if you rank Plat, you are no longer able to play Newcomer. So right now, Smurfs are the biggest problems in Newcomer. But let's pretend for a second that the Newcomer playlist is only used by new players. It's still a horrible experience. Newcomer only has 3 maps, and the rotation has never changed. This is so that new players are able to learn and become confident playing on those 3 maps. However, at the time I played, Consulate was removed from the map pool because of lighting issues. This meant that there were only 2 maps available. I think I got banked twice, and I played on Chalet about 30 times. I don't know if maps are selected randomly, or if it was just some kind of bug, but there should be a better rotation, especially with such a small map pool. Remember earlier when I said Bomb is a competitive game mode that takes a coordinated team to play properly? Yeah, well let's just throw 10 people who have never played the game before into Bomb without any explanation of how to play. What could go wrong? I understand that everyone plays Bomb, and so that's what they're trying to teach new players, but it's a bad idea. I think Secure Area should be the only game mode in Newcomer because it plays like a very simplified version of Bomb, and is much more fun when you have an uncoordinated team that is not communicating with each other. That's just a small change that could greatly increase the quality of the game mode. If I were to make major changes to the Newcomer playlist, here's what I'd do. I would turn the game mode into a T-Hunt multiplayer hybrid. One team would be made up of human players, while the other would be bots. This would discourage Smurfs from playing the playlist because it is a lot less fun to play with new people on your team than it is to play against them. When given a site, it would tell you who you should play as. For example, if you were playing Basement on Chalet, Bandit would be heavily suggested as someone your team should bring. On Defense, maybe the game could tell you what you should reinforce and what you should open up. On Attack, you could have a waypoint suggesting the best way to enter the building for that particular site. Maybe the first time you play an operator, it could give you hints on how to play them. The bots on the other team would be made up of actual operators who would use their abilities instead of the generic white mass. They would play as a team composition that is popular for the map you are playing on. Instead of only having 3 maps in the rotation, it could be 2, but they rotate weekly. That way you can get comfortable with 2 maps every week instead of being limited to 3 that never rotate. One of the biggest problems with Newcomer is the game is putting brand new players into a game mode with other brand new players. It teaches them nothing about the meta, and so new players have to make up their own meta. This meta that they create may not line up with the meta of the actual game. So why not just teach them what the current meta is instead of forcing them to make up their own, only for them to later realize that they were learning the wrong thing. Right now, Newcomer is basically just a worse casual, and from what I've heard from new players, casual is actually a better experience because no one really smurfs there, and other people on your team will be more experienced and will probably be able to teach you something about the current meta. One last thing I'll mention is that I think level should be taken into account with skill-based matchmaking. Right now, it only takes into account win and loss, but I think level and performance should also be weighed. Something like that would be nice because right now only win-loss are being taken into account, and there are a lot of other factors at play. Overall, Siege is kind of terrible for new players. From the situations that are outdated to the crazy amount of operator interactions, it can be a really hard game to get into. Most of the things I recommended in this video will probably never happen for a multitude of reasons, but you can make a difference. The next time you meet a new player, instead of kicking them or team killing them, why not ask them what they're struggling with and give them some advice? Or tell them exactly why they shouldn't open a mirror window or barricade every single doorway on the map. Try to be nice and constructive, and then maybe when they are a higher level, they will also be nice to the new players that they match up with. This is really the only thing that we can do for now. Thanks for watching. If you want to complain about something I got wrong, or you just want to add how you think the game could be improved for new players, be sure to leave a comment below.